Hi, my name's Carol Singleton, and I'm a veteran of the U.S. Army. I served from 1983 to 1986. My MOS was a Telecommunications Center Operator. And now I'm going to read my story. It's called Written Out of History. My mother recently gave me a copy of my grandfather's autobiography. Colonel Hubert Walter Collins, referred to as the Colonel, served in both World War I and World War II in the Army Corps of Engineers. Before returning home from the Second World War, he spent some time in a rehabilitation center to help with shell shock, as they referred to it in the 40s. We now call it post-traumatic stress. I only saw him once a year on our summer visits to their home in Fort Collins, Colorado, where he taught engineering at the university. Apparently, he was a well-loved professor. The clearest image I have of my grandfather is his hunched figure in a thick plaid farmer's shirt with suspenders, tending to his expansive garden, which held tidy rows of corn, tomatoes, green beans, squash, and more. I also remember the smell of mothballs in the basement and the sight of worn-out shoes, army riding boots, tools, and canned goods. It was a foreboding place. He was kind to us grandchildren, but distant. At every meal, always formal affairs, he recited a somber prayer, which started with, "Kind and indulgent Father." In recent years, I learned that my grandfather returned from the war a very different man than the one who left. He was prone to sudden outbursts, and on a number of occasions, he got overly rough with his 3 daughters. Like many men of that era, he was hoping for a son and instead got 3 girls. My mother willingly fulfilled the role of surrogate son. She loved science and math, a subject girls were not encouraged to pursue. And she eventually earned her master's degree in chemistry. At UC Berkeley, she faced an atmosphere of intolerance toward women in science. Professors refused to mentor her or provide her with research opportunities afforded the male students. But she was not deterred. She eventually went on to work for the Department of Energy and lead the plutonium facility at Lawrence Livermore Lab, the facility that engineered nuclear weapons during the Cold War, the era which I served. At the lab, my mother witnessed blatant discrimination against women. Women scientists were paid far less than the men, even when they did the exact same work. Upon retirement, my mother and other women at the lab filed a class action suit against the University of California, the entity that oversees the operation of the lab. The case received a large settlement against the lab for discrimination in hiring and promoting women. Her case, Singleton versus the Regents of the University of California, changed the lab's pay structure, which ensured equal pay for equal work, regardless of gender. My mom is a rock star. And how does all of this relate to my military experience? Here's the connection. I served in the U.S. Army as a telecommunications center operator from 1983 to 1986. That makes me a Cold War era soldier, which isn't exciting or glamorous. We never engaged in combat. We just constantly lived in a state of alert, waiting for the USSR to start a fight or drop a nuke. Although my job on paper was to be a telecommunications center operator and work in a tiny combat van, relaying secret messages to field operations, I was plucked from the comm center and put in an office to type correspondence, edit commendation letters, etc. I was also tasked to be the company commander's driver, which was a sweet deal. Because when we had to bivouac in the snow in the hills of Germany in the winter, I was able to occasionally drive back to the base and get a hot shower before returning to the field. However, as one of the only women in my platoon, I was not protected or coddled by the other troops. In fact, upon arrival at any new base camp, I was expected to do the grunt work of unloading supplies and setting up the tents. I was not given any slack, but I didn't mind. I preferred the tough field work to the secretarial job that I was relegated to most of the time. I served my 3 years, got out, and went to college on the GI Bill. I was proud of my military service. And I hope my grandfather would be too. He died many years ago, and we never really had the chance to talk about my experience in the Army. When I got to the end of his autobiography, where he praised both his son-in-law and his grandson for their service in the U.S. Army, and there was no mention of me, I felt a small pang of disappointment. It wasn't a big deal, but I wondered why. I asked my mom why he may have left me out like that. And she paused for a bit and then said, she remembered him saying that women in the military were just a distraction, that there was no place for them except as nurses in the armed forces. So that was that. This made me remember some research I had done for the Heroes Hall Museum, where I work. I was looking up information on the Women's Army Corps, which was created during World War II to free up the men to fight. When the WACs were first commissioned, there was a huge outcry from the public and the troops. There was even an attempt at a smear campaign that portrayed the women as being either promiscuous or lesbian. The naysayers were proven wrong, and the Women's Army Corps was a monumental success. The war could not have been won without the behind-the-scenes work of the enlisted women in all branches of the service, as well as the Rosie the Riveters who built the aircrafts that won the war. And let's not forget the WASPs, the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, who delivered military aircraft throughout the United States and flew planes with targets flying behind so ground troops could conduct target practice with live rounds. 38 WASPs died in the line of duty during World War II, and yet they did not receive military burials, benefits, or honors. I don't remember reading about any of this in my history book. Like my grandfather's autobiography, the women remained invisible, simply written out of history.